and act to ensure that every child is safeguarded, to enjoy their fundamental rights for an equal, equitable, and just life, free from conflict, persecution, precarity, and poverty. It is, after all, the duty of all governments to create an inclusive and peaceful environment where all children are nurtured and are able to thrive. The present situation is highlighting a stark reality, mainly that what our forefathers and foremothers have strived for 75 years ago to bring into being the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights is systematically being undone due to greed, egoism, corruption, and totalitarianism. Dear friends, do we realize that 75 years after the UN Declaration of Human Rights, we are still trying to convince governments that wars can only create suffering and misery and deny dignity to one and all? It is ironic that from one decade to another, the international community continues to commit to the same values without achieving the necessary transformation and progress in the process. The latest of such commitments was the adoption of Agenda 2030 and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. Once again, our governments committed to ensure that every human being should have access to enough resources to lead a dignified life free from violence. But I ask, how effective are these commitments when facts show that in 2016, just a year after committing to the SDGs, more countries experienced violent conflict than at any other time in nearly 30 years. Facts show that Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Syrian Arab Republic were the three countries which have seen the worst violent conflicts in the world. In these circumstances, the issue of unaccompanied migrant children and their struggle to survive is even more heartbreaking. It was only for a few days that the world was shocked and stopped with the body of the lifeless 3-year-old Syrian boy, Alan Kurdi, who was washed ashore on a beautiful beach in Turkey. What has changed after that? Nothing. In 2013, I also had a horrific personal experience when I was Minister for Family and Social Solidarity, and which I would like to share with you today. In October 2013, a boat with about 500 Syrians left Libya. The boat capsized a few hours after, and only a few of them survived. I went together with a team of psychosocial professionals to give primary support to the survivors who were brought to Malta. Whole families drowned. Amongst the survivors was a young boy of 7 years, Mohammed, who survived thanks to a 30-year-old Syrian man who managed to keep him afloat. Mohammed was traveling with his father and mother and 2 other siblings. He saw his family drown. He survived. I can never forget the empty look in Mohammed's eyes for days and weeks and not uttering a word. It was only after his uncle from Egypt got a glimpse of him from a picture on Facebook that he made contact and came to Malta. It was upon seeing his uncle that Mohammed's eyes came to life again and words started pouring out from his mouth again. The despair, the suffering, the pain of the survivors at the knowledge that they have lost their spouses and children will stay with me forever. We all know that unaccompanied migrant children carry the scars of experiencing all sorts of situations, wars. Some of these children will carry deep scars of their experience as child soldiers, of sexual, physical, and psychological abuse, of forced labor, and other forms of exploitation. Their minds, hearts, and souls will never be completely healed. These children will continue to need support all through their transition to adulthood, and probably all through their lives. The work of civil society organizations is invaluable and indispensable in these circumstances. On the other hand, it is frustrating to continue to see that governments continue to ignore their responsibility to adhere to the 32-year-old UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. It is unacceptable and scandalous that unaccompanied migrant children are still not treated equally and equitably in many countries. Adventure and happiness, and all about love and dignified nurture. The lives of unaccompanied migrant children is all about being left behind. Become more and more difficult for me to understand how the men and women responsible for governments in the world cannot see in the faces of unaccompanied migrant children their own daughters, sons, nieces, and nephews. I cannot accept that people in responsible roles cannot be moved by the plight of these children. I cannot comprehend the lack of empathy, solidarity, and action from many governments towards these most vulnerable children. I am convinced that they would do anything for their own children to be out of harm and protected. I am convinced that they would do everything to ensure that their children are out of danger and safe. Why is it so difficult for some not to feel for those mothers and fathers who have had to let go of their children, risking not seeing them ever again, simply to give them an opportunity to survive war, the conflict, the persecution, and the poverty in their own country? Why is empathy so difficult in our world when it is a moral obligation after all? Why is it so acceptable to break international conventions without repercussions? How can we live at peace with ourselves when we know of so many unaccompanied migrant children who are losing their lives and many others are living a life of total exclusion and hardship? Why does the terrifying statistics that we have do not compel governments to carry their responsibilities and uphold children's rights to provide adequately for all children? The vulnerability of these children is further compounded due to their being on their own. We can see this clearly by the number of unaccompanied migrant children that go missing on European soil. When any one of our children goes missing, we leave no stone unturned to find them. We report, we investigate, we cooperate, we have protocols in place for inter-country collaboration. Indicators from 25 countries in Europe for 2019, which was compiled by Missing Children Europe, report that 8,427 unaccompanied migrant children have gone missing on European soil. Simply the tip of the iceberg. We know that this is an underestimation due to lack of reporting, unregistered births, and most often needs analyzing due to its impact on unaccompanied migrant children coming to Europe is the lack of registered live births in Africa. The United Nations report number of live births. In Somalia alone, for example, only 3% of children under 5 of age were registered at birth. The European Asylum Support Office emphasizes that the absence of documentation that proves that the child is under 18 years of age have a direct effect on their rights holders. Children ever believe that the peace is the way forward for their well-being when living in Europe is so discriminating. And here other questions very often perplex me. Are we truly, as Europeans, upholding the legacy of our foremothers and forefathers to strive for a Europe that stands for peace, solidarity, equality, equity, and inclusion? How can we, as Europeans, promote ourselves as promoters and champions of human rights when we disregard the very essence of inclusion? Undoubtedly, Europe needs to go from words to action. Today, let us not only launch the findings of this important project, but let us also identify other ways to concretely reach out to these most vulnerable children of the world. On the other hand, Europe and the international community must do more to explore the complex causes of migration and to effectively respond to the factors that are driving it. Political turmoil, globalization, poverty, and the effects of climate change are real push factors that are driving tens of thousands of people away from their homes and countries. There are solutions. One very obvious solution is the much needed change in attitudes, mentality, and discourse about migration. Migrants cannot continue to be perceived as the curse of our present societies. Migrants are in fact contributing to our societies. If Europe had no migrants, who would operate most of our health services? Most of Europe has an aging population, and most of us speak and discuss the unsustainability of welfare and pension systems. We need to increase our workforce, and it is through migrants that we can manage that. How can we therefore ignore the plight of unaccompanied migrant children when they can be the solution in the long term of our complex socioeconomic situation? How can the African continent achieve peace? If Europe and the international community truly stand for peace, then they cannot continue to fuel conflicts. They cannot continue to wage proxy wars. They cannot continue see their economic growth by selling armaments and war facilities to terrorist groups. We need to stand up for sustainable peace. We need to effectively work for peace. We need to ensure that equality, equity, inclusion, and well-being are at the heart of all global policies and multilateral actions. We need urgently a change of mentality and attitudes. We need to believe in one human family. We need to act on the lessons learned, even from the pandemic. The pandemic has shown that borders are simply human-made. The pandemic has shown that no country can stand alone. The world now, more than ever before, needs unity, needs collaboration, needs coordination. This is the only way for humankind to thrive and live in sustainable peace, by ensuring a peaceful coexistence for all. We need to fight precarity, poverty, and conflict together. The need for a unified approach is most essential. We must find a shared vision. Cohesive efforts are crucial, and any attempts towards a viable solution should therefore be global. Lack of constructive communication between communities is often at the root of so much conflict and distrust. A strong commitment to long-lasting dialogue, partnerships, and connection is essential to shape the fate of both continents and our peoples. We should engage seriously and vigorously in addressing basic issues such as education, access to basic medical assistance, the setting up of firmer legal institutions, and better governance. Money needs to be invested to create an appropriate environment for free quality education, dignified job opportunities, and facilities to adapt to climate change in line with the 2015 Paris Agreement. Solidarity by all European states, as well as the international community, is key to fight the scourge of whole communities being driven out of their homes and countries. The world should not remain complacent at the exodus of peoples fleeing from their own countries. We must build stronger alliances and networks between our different nations that safeguard human rights and fundamental freedoms. Education is vital, as it will equip and prepare children to become active citizens. The 1999 United Nations General Assembly Declaration and Programme of Action on a Culture of Peace indicates that education is key in building such a culture that embraces and puts human dignity at the forefront. By developing and implementing an innovative methodology to foster social inclusion of unaccompanied migrant children, CiSoTRA has found a practical way of empowering communities so that they can become proactive contributors to their community. Educating children will lead to a respectful, multicultural perspective. Empowering children will lead to a world of active citizenship and able leadership. Child participation is crucial and will lead to the necessary dignified leadership skills in our countries. Humanity must not forget lessons learned from history. We must acknowledge that migration has been part of our history and is part of our present and will definitely continue to be part of our future. We must recognize the essential value of migrants' participation within our communities. We need to invest in their potential. The world cannot afford to ignore the potential of their contributions to our societies. Encouraging migrant participation in the workforce to support our economies and welfare systems is the smart thing to do. We cannot allow the discourse around migration to be hijacked by a short-sighted perspective. Migrants are essential collaborators to maintaining a healthy and sustainable workforce, especially in a shrinking European working age population. Eurostat indicators for 2018 have clearly shown that the proportion of people of working age in the EU 28 is shrinking while the relative number of those retiring is expanding. It further stated that the share of older persons in the total population will increase significantly in the coming decades. A study entitled The Impact of Migration, released by the International Monetary Fund in 2016, clearly shows that over the long term, migratory workers of diverse skill sets are bringing substantial benefits to high-level economies. The world urgently needs a culture of peace, where dialogue between people, respect, solidarity, negotiation, and ultimately human rights take priority over everything else. Peace requires more than just the involvement of governments. Peace must be founded on the intellectual and moral solidarity of humankind. The empowerment of all children is crucial in all this. It is only by investing in children that we can ensure that the value of peace will be second to nature to all humankind. On concluding, there is no justification for human suffering, violence, exploitation, and unfair treatment. Peace and development can only come about if people are led not only by economic growth of whatever sort, but also by a deep sense of solidarity and respect, which is inherent to good governance. In a globalized world where interdependencies are essential to bridge differences, I strongly believe that the countries of the Mediterranean should continue to engage with European partners. be any compromise where human life is concerned. And finally, I would like to call on all governments build and not destroy, and to celebrate our differences rather than let differences continue to tear us apart as a human family. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Her Excellencies Marie-Louise. Thank you really for your, as our colleague Gina posted on the chat, for this passionate speech. And recognizing, let's say, the value of all those who are working on the ground